Hello and welcome to Speaking of Data, presented by TDWI, the premier data, AI, and analytics podcast. I'm your co-host Andrew Miller, and on today's episode, we'll hear from Leticia Naqvi on delivering AI-ready data. We hope you enjoy this episode, and for more cutting-edge information on data, AI, and analytics, please visit tdwi.org. And with that, let's get started. All right, everyone, please welcome onto the podcast today Leticia Naqvi. She is the People Analytics Research Manager with Apple, and she has been recently on our virtual summit that took place last March, and she did such a good job that we figured this would be a great topic for us to cover and a great guest for us to have on our podcast today. So Meighan and I are very happy to have you on today, Leticia, to talk about delivering AI-ready data for decision support, something that was mentioned in your virtual summit talk that you gave. But first, before we jump into all the good questions, thank you so much for your time. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us for sure.
Absolutely. And I think the topic really is going to resonate with our audience as well. Delivering AI-ready data, I think, is a topic for many, many organizations, large enterprises. So let's just jump right in here. I think a great place for us to start is if you can tell us a little bit about your role that you're currently in and the scope of the data organization you're working with at Apple before we get into some of the weeds, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. So as Andrew mentioned, I am a People Analytics Research Manager at Apple. I primarily focus on immigration data. My work sits at the intersection of operational data, workforce data, and analytics, so specifically within the global mobility and immigration programs. From a scope perspective, I work across multiple systems and stakeholders, including human resources systems like Workday, vendor platforms, and our centralized data environment. So currently the goal is to bring like the fragmented data sources together into more like a unified, governed, and analytics ready foundation. A big part of my role is not just building reports, but also helping shift the organization from static reporting to more strategic decision support. That includes defining consistent metrics, improving data quality, and ensuring that what we do deliver actually aligns with how leaders make decisions. And ultimately, the focus is on enabling more scalable, data-driven insights that can support both operational and strategic outcomes.
Thanks for giving us that overview. We've been seeing in the news, we've seen in TDWI's research that there's so much excitement and enthusiasm around AI, and so many companies are sort of jumping in and seeing what they can do with it, but really having difficulties scaling it. What do you feel like the most common blockers are for organizations scaling AI?
It's a really great question. I think in my experience, the biggest blockers to scaling AI are not technical, but more they're foundational and organizational. The first is fragmented and inconsistent data. Many organizations have data spread across systems with different definitions, making it difficult to create a reliable baseline for AI models. So if your inputs are not aligned, your outputs will not be trusted. I feel like the second is a lack of governance and clear ownership. Without defined standards for data quality, access and definitions, AI initiatives tend to stall or produce inconsistent results. The third is a misalignment between data teams and business decision makers. Often AI is built in isolation from the actual workflows it is meant to support, which leads to solutions that do not get adopted. And then finally, there is a readiness gap. Organizations often jump to AI before they have the data maturity, processes, or change management structures in place. So instead of scaling, they end up with isolated pilots that do not translate into real impact. So overall, scaling AI is less about the model and more about whether the organization is ready to operationalize it.
Yeah, When we look at organizations that struggle to scale AI, the patterns are actually very consistent and they align very closely with what you're seeing, Leticia, and what you just shared with us. First, as you mentioned, it starts with the data foundation. Many organizations are still dealing with fragmented platforms and complex data environments. As they move into generative AI, that complexity only increases because now you're not just relying on structured data, but also unstructured content. And if the underlying data isn't reliable, well, the outputs won't be either. And that leads directly into the second issue, and actually one of the leading blockers for AI getting off the ground and scaling, and that's data quality and trust. What's important here is that data issues that may be somewhat manageable in a pilot environment quickly become failure points when you try to scale. You simply can't scale an AI on a foundation you don't trust. So the third is really around skills and AI literacy. We often see that organizations have pockets of expertise, but not enough depth to operationalize AI across the business. So that makes scaling a challenge as well. And finally, as you mentioned too, governance becomes really a ceiling for how far you go. In early experimentation, gaps in governance can be tolerated. But as soon as organizations try to scale, especially with generative and agentic AI, risk, compliance, and trust come front and center. And TDWI data shows that 60% of organizations cite AI governance challenges, and nearly half point to data governance in terms of what's standing in the way of them scaling their AI initiatives. So when you put it all together, AI, as you said, Leticia, isn't really being limited mainly by technology or a model problem, but it's data, skills, and governance problem. And organizations that address those three areas are going to be the ones that successfully move from pilots to production at scale.
Yeah, I think governance is something that sometimes gets put on a last resort, but I think it's one of the most important because it does define like clear ownership and the standards for the data specifically.
Well, how have you sort of repositioned governance from being a bottleneck within your organization to an enabler of AI and what you're doing on the data side at Apple?
So I think like we approached governance by focusing on like clarity rather than restriction. So that meant defining consistent data definitions, aligning on key metrics, and establishing clear ownership across the systems and teams. For example, we looked at where data should live, how it should flow, and which system should be considered the source of truth for different types of data. That helped reduce duplication and inconsistencies across reporting. We also focused on making governance practical. Instead of creating heavy frameworks, we embedded governance into the workflows people were already using, such as data pipelines, reporting layers, and vendor integrations. So as a result, that governance actually accelerates the decision making. So when stakeholders trust the data and understands how it is defined, they spend less time validating and more time acting on insights. So governance, when done right, becomes a foundation for both scalability and trust.
Yeah, agreed.
I did want to ask a little bit about that consolidation piece between operational and people data. So if you can maybe explain why that's so important, or at least double click on that for us, and then what the data environment looked like maybe before that consolidation happened.
That's a really good question. So one of the key challenges that we saw was that operational data and people data were living in completely separate ecosystems. On one side, you have operational data coming from the vendors, such as case activity, process timelines, status tracking. And on the other side, you have people data and systems such as Workday, which includes employee attributes, organizational hierarchy, and workforce planning data. Independently, both data sets are useful, but they do not provide like the full context. For example, you cannot fully understand in my realm immigration risk, workforce impact, or planning needs without connecting these two perspectives. Before consolidation, the environment was highly fragmented. The reporting relied on static extracts, manual reconciliation, and multiple versions of the same data across reports that created inconsistencies and made it difficult to trust or scale the insights. So by bringing these data sets together into a centralized environment, we were able to create a more complete and consistent view. That allowed us to move beyond descriptive reporting and start enabling more forward-looking, decision-oriented insights.
So, Leticia, thank you so much for talking us through how you're sort of consolidating the data into a single source of truth. Can you tell us why that's so important?
It's a lot of factors. It eliminates conflicting answers. So especially in the immigration and people data world, it creates decision confidence. I think it also enables the AI to actually work because AI depends on consistency and reliability. Because the source of truth, without a source of truth, the models train on conflicting data, and then the outputs contradict each other, and then no one trusts the results. So AI without a source of truth is just automated confusion, in my opinion. And then it does reduce manual reconciliation. Before, teams were manually reconciling reports, analysts were spending time fixing, the numbers. There was inconsistency in reporting, but after data is aligned upstream, reports are consistent by default, and then analysts focus on insights and not cleanup. So you eliminate like the invisible work that doesn't scale. And overall, it supports governance and compliance. I think truly you can't govern what you can't centralize and define. So in the simplest way to explain it, the source of truth ensures that every decision is based on consistent, trusted data. And without it, the organizations will be spending time reconciling numbers instead of acting on them. And it just becomes reactive versus more proactive. And the goal is to have AI and advanced analytics that can be fully reliably applied.
Okay. Are you guys doing a lot of work as part of the consolidation efforts and governance efforts, quality efforts, et cetera? Are you doing a lot of work on metadata and your semantic layer? We've been hearing so much about semantic layer lately and the importance of it, especially when it comes to AI. Does that fall under your purview?
It does, because I think this is, especially because with immigration, that is like a new context that's being brought in. And so like we're developing that as a new thing, but it's the semantic layer overall is the business meaning of the data, right? So it is part of like how are the metrics being defined, calculated, and consistently understood across the organization. So we're fully developing that as far as like the immigration metrics as it relates to people data, as that's like the foundational steps there.
So, Leticia, as we wrap up here with the episode, and thank you again so much for joining us, what do you think, like, if you had a crystal ball here into the future, the most important things, like what are the most important things data leaders need to be thinking about and planning for and prioritizing over the next 12 to 18 months?
I think data leaders should focus on key priorities such as improving data quality, standardizing definitions, and ensuring that the data is structured in a way that supports both analytics and AI use cases. Um, Second is shifting from reporting to decision support. I feel like organizations need to move beyond dashboards and start designing data products that directly support specific decisions and workflows. Um, Third is investing in organizational readiness. So that includes leadership alignment, data literacy, and change management. So even the best data solutions will not deliver if the organization is not prepared to use them. So, in short, and underlying all of this is governance. As AI adoption accelerates, having clear frameworks for data usage, access, and ethics will become even more critical. So, overall, I think the focus should be less on building more models and more on creating the conditions that allow these models to deliver real sustained impact.
Leticia, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. Couldn't agree more with where data leaders need to focus over the next year. We also are very excited to have you join us again in Anaheim in September for our Data and AI Leader Summit that's co-located with TDWI Transform. You'll again be joining us to talk about the critical importance of data foundations for AI. And so we hope all of our listeners will join us there as well to hear more about Leticia's progress at Apple and also get some helpful tips on improving your data foundations for the future of AI.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was an absolute pleasure, and as Meighan mentioned, I'll be putting more information about our upcoming event in September in the description below. But again, thank you for your time today. It's been fantastic talking with you. Take care. Thanks again for tuning in to Speaking of Data, presented by TDWI. If you'd like to engage further with us, please check out our website at tdwi.org. And please don't forget to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Take care, and we'll see you soon. To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org, or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.